On the channel, we talk a lot about Wrath of the Lich King, what's good about it and what changes it will make, but it also did things to the game that for many were a negative. Unnecessary convenience steps, making some areas of the game just a brainless time sink, and degrading the community aspect of the game that early versions of WoW had sought to drive. Take this all with a grain of salt of course, but these are some of the more common complaints about Wrath. I don't think they're going to stop it from being a huge success, but I reckon it's interesting to highlight that even during the expansion itself, some of these things had started to become noticeable problems. Let's get into it and talk about Wrath of the Lich King's most controversial features. Let's just start it off with a big one, shall we? Dungeon Finder. So the tool we have in TBC at the moment is a rather rudimentary version of what they use in retail, which is named the LFM or Looking for More tool. It's missing a lot of features and players have made their own LFG through the bulletin board add-on, so having a good interface to search for others is clearly a desirable idea. Originally moving from TBC to Wrath, very little changed with this system. You logged into Dalaran, you went to see what the daily was, and then you stood there and spammed to find a party. You're going to want way more badges than TBC, believe me. Patch 3.3 did away with the old LFG and introduced the Dungeon Finder tool. Very simple concept: open the interface, choose your role, press find group, wait, and then join a dungeon when it pops. You're instantly teleported to said dungeon and you are matched with players across your entire region. This was the second region-wide feature Blizzard had introduced. The other was cross-realm BGs in vanilla, which was patch 1.12. Interesting parallel here, end of expansion feature that makes something cross-realm, and I'm just saying nobody complained about cross-realm BGs and they were in classic from day one. So what are the issues with Looking for Dungeon? People don't like the anonymity it provides. You can be the most terrible person to others and have zero accountability because you don't play on the same realm. Ninjaing items, pulling random packs, flaming, all the good stuff to expect from Internet of Randoms. The activity outside of dungeons of players gradually getting together, summoning, interacting, gone. Just flat out gone. The open world will get a lot more empty because people will be AFKing, doing weapon skill, yeah, that still exists, training professions, and just generally doing something else with their time other than spamming the chat. You don't know whether your tank is actually a tank or a Fury Warrior who doesn't like waiting for the DPS queue time. Maybe the dungeons are simple enough for this to not be an issue and dual spec is a thing, so at least they can be prot, but trying to deal with somebody who is clearly not set up to tank in any form as a healer or a DPS and watching them get deleted on every other pack or doing no threat is just frustrating. And the later game ICC dungeons with Forge of Souls, Pit of Sauron and Halls of Reflection actually do hit pretty hard and will clap lower gear players out. So should anything change with this system? Honestly, I don't want to see any half measures to it. Imagine if it auto-formed your group but then doesn't teleport you to a dungeon. Well, it's going to be either I'm at the stone because I'm a useful person who wants to summon and go but nobody else is, so I just have to wait for them, or nobody's at the stone so I get on my flying mount, point it in the right direction and then go FK for a few minutes. What's really the point of either of those? So should the whole system just be same server instead perhaps? Well, let's take a look at two of the biggest population servers in the world. Firemore at the moment has a weekly player base of 35,000 players and Benediction has just under 30k. I don't know, you want a community on somewhere like that? It's an enormous crowd, there's so many different faces there. I'd expect these to peak 50k in Wrath as well, by the way. And if you don't want to do it with randoms, just do it with your guild. Hop on and say, hey, who wants to do the daily? Everyone wants to do one daily dungeon. It shouldn't be hard to find people within your own group. And then if you do want the Chernobyl experience, you can enter the LFD. There is actually something which I really believe they should take into consideration. It was a hotfix made in Kata. I'm not going to read a lot of it here, pause if you like, but I think if you go over it, you will agree all of these seem like very sensible things that should be in the LFD. I'll go over two of them. If there is a group of 3 or more friends and somebody in that group initiates a vote kick of a random party member, it now requires 4 votes to kick the player instead of the standard 3. The penalty for using the vote kick feature too often will now not allow the player to initiate a vote kick for 2 hours, up from 45 minutes. Yeah, I think whenever Wrath's out, it would benefit from every change made here. Hopefully Blizzard sees this and takes it into consideration. But you know, it wasn't just Blizzard who were adding controversial features in Wrath. Players had a go at it too with the Gear Score add-on. This gave each item you wore a numerical value which added up to your total gear score. The higher your gear score, the better gear you had overall. Easy, right? So what didn't people like? Well, first of all, the add-on just didn't do a very good job of actually judging how good your gear was. There's more to this than just item level and raw stats on something. Sometimes an item from an old raid was just so good you were wearing it for a long time, so your gear could be correct, but somebody else has a higher gear score. Gear score was part of the grand rise of player screening. The 10-man normal content was designed to be easy and accessible in Wrath. Hugging saw a huge rise in popularity throughout the expansion, and badge gear with each new major patch meant everybody had access to really good epics. So how do we know how good somebody is really? Link your gear score and achievement. You could fake achievements through add-ons and equip random high item level gear to make your character appear better. People didn't like being screened for content without being given a chance, yet over time gear score would carry on to be considered a relevant number, and in retail today is now a full-on part of the game. I kind of doubt the same add-on will make a return for Wrath where everybody will use it again. If it does, I think players will actually make a quote-unquote correct gear score, where say a BIS item is worth 100 points, second BIS is worth 90, and so on for each patch. Can't wait to see the arguments over what's BIS if that's a thing, because people love arguing about gear. Moving on though, raids, they're a little hit and miss. I've talked about it before on the channel, but tier 7, that being revamped Nax 1025, Eye of Eternity and Sartharian Lair, are all very much straightforward and are going to be run over in no time by how knowledgeable the player base is these days. And then later we have Trial of the Crusader. This was the first tier where Blizzard tried heroic raiding, but heroic didn't share a lockout with normal, meaning at the time players were doing up to 4 different versions of the same raid each reset. Whilst I think Ulduar and ICC will be great, half the raiding content the expansion will provide has cause for problems in difficulty or repetitiveness. These were also complaints during the actual expansion, and both the raids that saw problems had them addressed in their respective follow-up tier. Ulduar added hard modes to have challenging content, and ICC had shared lockouts between difficulties. Now if we look back to TBC where Blizzard chose to stagger raid releases, we had about 3.5 months of Kara, Gruul and Mag, and I think most people erred on the side of that felt a little bit long for what it was. And what did we have to do in TBC apart from raid? You had your PvP, you had your rep farms, and the big one, attunements. Getting revered for heroics, farming your badge gear, the Kara questline, and so on. In Wrath there's PvP, there's rep farm, there's achievements, no attunements though. Well okay, you need one person to have killed KT to do Eye of Eternity, but that's not much of a hurdle, is it? Personally, I'm treating phase 1 as Wrath as the same as TBC. The setup phase. Do my professions, farm gold, do any weapon skill, set up ults for professions or cap them for raiding and so on. If Blizzard came out and say, hey, guess what, we're doing optional tier 7 hard modes, sure, I'd be down for it. I don't think they will do that though, not just due to the effort, but there's a lot that goes into it, like tuning, rewards, and achievements. For Trial of the Crusader, however, I wouldn't be surprised if they take the change from ICC and make the difficulty share lockouts, just so we aren't clearing the room 4 times a week. Next, leveling and looms, or heirlooms specifically. In Wrath, there's a few different ones. There's weapons and trinkets, these just give stats, and then there's the shoulders and chest, which give 10% bonus XP each, and a ring from winning the Kalawak fishing derby that gives a further 5%. What actually are heirlooms though? How do they work in Wrath? Well, they're items that are account bound that level up with you, equipable all the way from level 1 through to level cap, and they're bought in Dalaran using badges which are obtained from a whole host of different things. The idea here is to make ults easy to level. You essentially will never take an heirloom off from the moment you equip it until level cap, both for the XP benefits and the fact they're just really good items with the correct stats and they do a lot of damage. Already in TBC, leveling has been toned down. Heirlooms will make it really easy. Not retail levels of easy, but compared to classic, yes, it's extremely noticeable. If you ever get to the point where you're on a fully loomed out character, you're going to be surprised by how fast the leveling can be. Back in the day, WoW was still on a growing curve at this point in time. New people were joining, or level cap players were leveling ults. It was seen as the turning point of leveling just becoming easy and oversimplified. Oh, and don't forget we had the LFD system on top of this. You can smash those in looms. You know what leveling change I want to see in Wrath? Them to add the Night Elf Mohawk back into the starter zones. I pity the fool who doesn't. Next is something I mentioned recently, but I just have to include it here because it was so controversial. World of Warcraft's first ever store mount was added to the game in patch 3.3 3.3. $25 was the price of amount that probably should have dropped in Ulduar, but I guess Blizzard liked the Invincible model so much, so they wanted another way for people to get their hands on a horse with wings, this time with bonus sparkles. It definitely made waves in the community in 2010 for all of the wrong reasons. Why? The same reason as literally every store mount that's ever been put in the game. It looks unique, you can't get it in the game, and you're already paying twice to be able to play. WTF Blizz. Finally, the community. WoW players. It all started to get more divided. The old guard of players began to resent the convenience and accommodation offered to the newer era of players, labeling those who started during Wrath as Wrath babies. These guys had no idea how hard the game used to be. Nax 40, 0.1% of the player base cleared it, if that. This new Nax Rammus is a joke. Heroics were super hard in TBC, now I can face roll them with randoms. Attunements would take us weeks to do, and now you can just walk into any raid. Leveling in vanilla was hardcore, it's just so easy now. For us now, looking back, having redone Classic and the majority of TBC, we know that essentially people back then, well, they just kinda sucked at the game. They knew less, they had less information available, but that's not to say some of these things aren't certainly true. Heroics are more simple, achievements are gone, and revamped Nax will prove to be much easier than vanilla version. But that is Wrath, those are the decisions that were made then for the game. We've enjoyed Classic so far with minimal changes to core features. After all, it's an old game that brings back good and bad. I wouldn't bother with trying to get overly involved in changing things too dramatically. Maybe you don't love everything about the expansion after all, and that is okay. Seasonal servers are where changes will be, if they are a thing one day of course, which I reckon they will be. Eventually. That's everything though. Let me know if any other features stand out to you as controversial in the expansion. As always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I will see you all in the next one very soon.